Uh, Let me speak to the part of you that has been trying to explain your heart to someone who refuses to hear it. If you have been shrinking your voice, questioning your worth, or replaying conversations just to feel understood, this message is for you. There comes a moment in life when clarity arrives. Not through answers from others, but through silence within yourself. And that moment is sacred. Listen closely. Not everyone who pulls away is strong. Some people distance themselves because closeness exposes what they are unwilling to heal. Avoidant behavior is not confidence, it is fear dressed in control. And your job was never to fix fear that does not want to be confronted. You were not sent into this world to beg for consistency, to negotiate for emotional safety, or to convince someone of your value. Your value was established before opinions formed, before rejection occurred, before silence entered the room. You do not argue with someone who cannot meet you emotionally. You observe. You discern, and then you decide. Arguing with an avoidant is like pouring water into a cracked vessel. No matter how pure your intention, it leaks. It drains you. It leaves you exhausted and doubting your own clarity. Wisdom teaches restraint. Strength teaches stillness. And divine alignment teaches when to stop speaking and start honoring yourself. Let me remind you of something. Eternal people who are meant to walk with you will not require you to abandon yourself to keep them. You do not chase. You do not plead. You do not over-explain. You stand firm. You stay rooted. And if they cannot meet you where truth lives, you do not follow them into confusion. Walking away is not weakness. Walking away is power under control. It is the moment you choose peace over chaos, self-respect over emotional negotiation, destiny over delay. Exit does not mean you lost, it means you listened. There is a divine order to relationships. What resists growth eventually removes itself. What dishonors your a value disqualifies itself. And what cannot stay will make room for what is aligned. Trust that. Know your value. Don't argue with resistance. When clarity comes, exit with grace. Because when you choose yourself, you are not walking alone, you are walking with purpose. Avoidant behavior is not a reflection of your worth. It is a mirror of another person's unresolved fear of intimacy, vulnerability, and emotional accountability. When someone pulls away, goes silent, minimizes connection, or becomes emotionally unavailable the moment closeness is required, the instinctive response is self-questioning. You start wondering if you said too much, asked for too much, felt too deeply, or expected too honestly. But this reaction is not truth, it is conditioning. You were taught, subtly or directly, that love must be earned, that presence must be negotiated, and that distance means deficiency in you. Yet avoidance is not triggered by your inadequacy. It is triggered by emotional depth. An avoidant individual often associates closeness with loss of control. Intimacy threatens the protective walls they built long before you entered their life. These walls were formed in environments where emotional needs were dismissed, punished, or unmet. As a result, connection feels unsafe to them. When you show consistency, emotional clarity, or a desire for genuine bonding, it activates their deepest fear, not because you are overwhelming, but because you are real. Your authenticity presses against their survival strategies, and survival strategies will always fight vulnerability. This is why their withdrawal intensifies when the bond deepens. It is not that they suddenly stopped valuing you. It is that valuing you requires presence, responsibility, and emotional courage they have not yet developed. Avoidant behavior is an internal conflict, not a verdict on your lovability. The distance they create is self-protection, not evaluation. They are not measuring your worth, they are managing a fear. When you internalize their behavior, you begin shrinking yourself. You lower your standards, silence your needs, and attempt to become more acceptable. But love was never meant to be accessed through self-erasure. Your value does not fluctuate based on someone's emotional capacity. A person's inability to meet you does not downgrade your worth. It reveals the limits of their own emotional infrastructure. Avoidant patterns are rooted in fear of dependence, fear of being seen, and fear of losing autonomy. These fears existed long before you arrived. You did not create them, and you cannot heal them through effort or explanation. Trying harder does not resolve avoidance. It reinforces it. The more you pursue clarity, the more they retreat. This dynamic can make you feel powerless, but in reality, it exposes a crucial truth: their behavior is about regulation, not rejection. Your worth is stable, grounded, and inherent. It does not rise when someone chooses closeness, and it does not fall when someone chooses distance. If your value depended on another person's capacity to connect, it would never be secure. A true value is internal. It is anchored in self-respect, awareness, and alignment. Once you understand this, the emotional fog lifts. Ugh. You stop interpreting silence as failure and start recognizing it as limitation. Avoidant behavior teaches a profound lesson when viewed correctly. It shows you the difference between someone being unwilling and you being unworthy. It separates emotional unavailability from personal inadequacy. This awareness protects your spirit. It prevents you from overgiving, over-explaining, and over-investing in relationships that cannot sustain depth. When you no longer personalize avoidance, you reclaim your power. You stop chasing validation and start honoring truth. You realize that someone else's fear does not get to define your identity. And in that realization, you stand taller, clearer, and more anchored in who you are, unmoved by hence, unshaken by silence, and grounded in the knowing that your worth was never on trial. Arguing with an avoidant does not create understanding. It creates exhaustion. It pulls you into a cycle where logic is offered to someone who is not emotionally available enough to receive it. You may come prepared with clarity, honesty, and a sincere desire to resolve tension. But avoidance does not operate on reason, it operates on self-protection. When an avoidant feels confronted, even gently, that their nervous system interprets it as threat. What you experience as a conversation, they experience as pressure. And pressure does not open hearts. It closes them. Every argument with an avoidant slowly redirects your energy away from yourself. You begin explaining feelings that should be obvious, offending needs that should be respected, and justifying boundaries that should be honored without debate. This is where confusion enters. Not because the truth is unclear, but because you are trying to gain a clarity from someone who avoids clarity by nature. Their responses may be dismissive, vague, intellectualized, or silent. None of these invite resolution. They only extend the cycle of misunderstanding. Avoidant individuals often disengage during conflict not because the issue is insignificant, but because engagement would require emotional accountability. Accountability threatens the emotional distance they rely on to feel safe. So instead of addressing the concern, they redirect, minimize, or shut down. You may mistake this for indifference or lack of care, but at its core, it is avoidance of emotional exposure. Arguing in this dynamic does not bridge the gap, it widens it. The more you argue, the more you train yourself to abandon your inner wisdom. You start questioning whether your needs are reasonable, whether your timing is wrong, or whether your expectations are excessive. This internal negotiation erodes self-trust. You may leave conversations feeling unheard, unseen, and unsaid. Addled not because you were wrong, but because the space was never safe for mutual exchange. Confusion thrives where emotional safety is absent. Arguments also create a false sense of control. You believe that if you just phrase things correctly, choose softer words, or provide better explanations, understanding will finally land. But avoidance is not a communication problem. It is a relational pattern. No amount of clarity can dissolve someone else's resistance to intimacy. When you argue with an avoidant, you are essentially asking them to become someone they are not yet ready to be. There is wisdom in restraint. Silence, in this context, is not submission, it is self-respect. Stepping back from argument is a conscious refusal to pour emotional energy into a space that cannot hold it. A clarity does not require consensus. Sometimes clarity comes from observing what repeatedly fails. If every attempt at dialogue leaves you drained and destabilized, the lesson is not to try harder, it is to stop engaging and losing exchange. Confusion lifts the moment you stop arguing and start observing patterns. You notice that your calm explanations are met with withdrawal, that your vulnerability triggers distance, and that your efforts are met with minimal return. These patterns speak louder than promises or apologies. They tell you what this dynamic can and cannot offer. And in that awareness, you gain something more valuable than resolution, you gain truth. Arguing with an avoidant keeps you emotionally tethered to potential rather than reality. Letting go of the argument allows you to see what is actually present. It restores your clarity because you are no longer seeking validation from someone who cannot give it. Energy conserved becomes self-directed. Confusion fades when you stop fighting resistance and start honoring what is being revealed. Your value is not a variable that rises and falls based on another person's ability to choose you. It is not measured by attention, assistancy, or emotional availability from someone else. Value is inherent. It existed before connection, before rejection, before silence ever entered the space between you. When someone withdraws or fails to choose you fully, The mind often translates that absence into self-doubt. You begin to wonder what you lack, what you could improve, or who you need to become to be enough. But worth does not operate on the axis of approval. It operates on truth. When you allow another person's behavior to define your value, you hand them authority over your identity. That authority is misplaced. People choose based on their capacity, their wounds, their timing, and their fears, not based on an objective assessment of your worth. Someone can recognize your value and still be unable to meet it. Someone can desire you and still retreat. These contradictions are not evaluations of you. They are reflections of internal limitation. Choice is influenced by readiness, not value. Attachment often distorts perception. The more emotionally invested you are, the more tempting it becomes to equate being chosen with being worthy. This creates a dangerous dependency where your sense of self is tied to external validation. In this state, rejection feels like erasure, and acceptance feels like survival. But a stable sense of worth cannot be outsourced. Anything that can be taken away was never the foundation. True value is not granted. It is recognized. Your worth remains intact even when someone cannot see it clearly. A closed heart cannot reflect light. No matter how bright the source, when someone fails to choose you, it does not diminish what you bring, it reveals what they cannot hold. Internalizing their decision only leads you to abandon your own center. You begin performing instead of being, adjusting instead of aligning, waiting instead of living. This quiet self-betrayal costs more than any rejection ever could. There is a profound difference between being wanted and being worthy. Want fluctuates, worth does not. Want is influenced by mood, fear, convenience, and circumstance. Worth is anchored in character, integrity, and self-awareness. When you confuse the two, you chase desire and lose yourself in the process. When you separate them, you stand grounded even in disappointment. You understand that not being chosen does not mean being unchosen by life. Your value does not increase when someone stays, commits, or prioritizes you. Their presence may affirm what already exists, but it does not create it. Likewise, their absence does not subtract from you. Absence exposes space, not deficiency. It creates room for truth to surface, for you to see where alignment is lacking and where self-respect is required. The moment you stop interpreting distance as judgment, you reclaim emotional sovereignty. Understanding this reshapes how you move through relationships. You stop negotiating your worth and start expressing your truth. You stop overgiving to earn a place and start choosing environments that can meet you. You no longer chase validation because you are no longer uncertain of your value. This inner certainty changes your posture, your boundaries, and your standards. When your worth is anchored internally, you respond to rejection with clarity instead of collapse. You grieve without self-blame. You release without resentment. Because you move forward without needing proof that you mattered, because you already know. Silence and distance are often misunderstood as deliberate punishment or emotional indifference. But in avoidant dynamics, they are more accurately coping mechanisms. When emotional intensity rises, when vulnerability is required, or when expectations feel implied, an avoidant nervous system shifts into self-preservation mode. Withdrawal becomes a way to regulate internal discomfort. This response is not strategic in the way it may appear. It is automatic. The body pulls away before the mind fully processes what is happening. Interpreting this withdrawal as a personal rejection creates unnecessary suffering and misdirected self-blame. Avoidant individuals often lack the internal tools to remain emotionally present during moments of relational demand. Closeness activates unresolved fears, fear of being depended on, fear of losing autonomy, fear of emotional engulfment. Silence becomes the quickest route back to perceived safety. Distance restores their sense of control. This does not mean they do not care. It means they do not know how to care without feeling threatened. Their retreat is an attempt to stabilize themselves, not to diminish you. When you are on the receiving end of this silence, the mind naturally seeks explanation. You replay conversations, search for mistakes, and attempt to decode meaning from absence. The danger lies in assuming that their withdrawal is a message about your worth or behavior. In reality, it is a message about their capacity. Distance is not feedback, it is avoidance. Treating it as evaluation places you in an impossible position, trying to correct something that was never about you. Silence can feel like abandonment, especially if you value communication and emotional transparency. But equating silence with judgment keeps you emotionally tethered to someone else's regulation patterns. You become reactive, anxious. and hyper-aware of shifts that have nothing to do with you. This constant interpretation drains energy and distorts self-perception. Understanding silence as a coping mechanism allows you to step out of that loop and return to yourself. A distance also creates a false sense of power imbalance. The one who withdraws appears to control the emotional temperature of the relationship, while the one who remains present feels exposed. But this is an illusion. Avoidance is not power, it is limitation. The inability to stay, speak, and engage reflects a lack of emotional range, not emotional superiority. When you stop chasing connection during their withdrawal, the imbalance solves. You reclaim agency by refusing to personalize what is not yours to carry. Recognizing silence as self-regulation rather than rejection changes your response. Instead of scrambling for reassurance or closure, you observe patterns. You notice when closeness leads to disappearance, when clarity leads to shutdown, when honesty leads to distance. These patterns provide information. They reveal what the relationship can sustain and what it cannot. Information is grounding. It removes ambiguity and replaces hope-based interpretation with reality-based awareness. Distance is also instructive. It teaches you how you respond to uncertainty, how quickly you abandon self-trust, and how deeply you associate presence with safety. This awareness is valuable. It allows you to strengthen your internal stability rather than outsourcing it to someone else's availability. When you no longer interpret silence as a verdict, you regain emotional steadiness. Silence loses its power the moment you stow. Assigning it meaning it does not carry. It becomes neutral, a behavior rooted in fear rather than a statement about you. And from that neutrality, clarity emerges. Self-respect communicates in ways explanations never can. It is a language felt rather than spoken, understood through consistency rather than persuasion. When you continuously explain your feelings, justify your needs, or defend your boundaries to someone who resists them, the message received is not clarity, it is availability for negotiation. And self-respect does not negotiate its right to exist. It stands firm, quiet, and unmistakable. And many people believe that if they can just explain themselves better, they will finally be understood. This belief is rooted in the hope that misunderstanding is the problem. But in avoidant dynamics, misunderstanding is rarely the issue. The issue is unwillingness or incapacity to engage emotionally. No amount of eloquence can create receptivity where resistance exists. When you continue explaining in that space, you are not being heard, you are being tolerated. And tolerance is not connection. Self-respect shifts the dynamic because it removes the invitation to dismiss you. When you stop over-explaining, if you stop presenting your needs as debatable, you communicate through action that your emotional reality is valid whether or not it is accepted. This quiet confidence disrupts patterns more effectively than confrontation ever could. It signals that you are anchored internally, not dependent on agreement to feel secure. Over-explanation often arises from fear of being misunderstood, abandoned, or perceived as difficult. But this fear slowly erodes dignity. You begin softening truths that need firmness, minimizing needs that deserve acknowledgement, and apologizing for feelings that are simply human. Self-respect corrects this drift. It restores balance by reminding you that your experience does not require endorsement to be legitimate. When self-respect is present, boundaries become clear without being loud. You no longer chase responses, demand reassurance, or argue for consistency. You respond instead of react. You choose distance when respect is absent and engagement when it is mutual. This choice speaks volumes. It tells others how to treat you without issuing ultimatums or pleas. Explanations often invite debate. Self-respect invites alignment. One asks to be understood, the other expects to be honored. When you explain repeatedly, you keep the door open for invalidation. When you stand in self-respect, you close the door to dynamics that require self-betrayal. This is not rigidity, it is discernment. There is also a spiritual dimension to self-respect. It is an act of stewardship over your emotional energy. You were not meant to pour yourself into spaces that cannot hold you. Protecting your peace is not avoidance, it is wisdom. Silence, withdrawal, or disengagement when rooted in self-respect are not punishments. They are corrections. I realign you with environments that can meet you without resistance. People who are capable of respect respond to self-respect with increased care. Those who are not capable often react with discomfort or distance. This reaction is informative. It reveals who benefits from your over-explaining and who honors your boundaries. In this way, self-respect becomes a filter. It clarifies relationships without confrontation. Ultimately, A self-respect teaches others how to engage with you by demonstrating what you will and will not accept. It does not argue for value, it embodies it. And that embodiment carries a weight no explanation ever could. Walking away is often misinterpreted as abandonment, cruelty, or emotional coldness. But in truth, it can be one of the highest expressions of alignment with self-respect and truth. And you choose to step away from a dynamic that consistently dishonors your needs, you are not rejecting the other person, you are accepting reality. You are acknowledging, whoa, a hot is, rather than clinging to what you wish it could become. This distinction is vital because abandonment leaves from avoidance, while alignment leaves from clarity. Abandonment is reactive. It is driven by anger, punishment, or the desire to provoke remorse. Alignment is intentional. It comes after observation, discernment, and repeated attempts to engage with honesty. When you walk away from a relationship that cannot meet you, it is not because you lack compassion, but because you have exhausted confusion. Staying in a space that erodes your self-trust is not loyalty. It is self-neglect. Leaving is an act of responsibility toward your own well-being. Many people stay because they fear being seen as heartless. They absorb emotional discomfort in silence to preserve the image of being patient, understanding, or loving, but love that requires self-erasure is not devotion, it is distortion. Alignment asks a different question: does this environment allow me to remain whole? If the answer is no, walking away becomes a form of truth-telling, not abandonment. There is also a misconception that leaving means giving up too easily. In reality, walking away often comes after prolonged effort. It follows cycles of communication, hope, disappointment, and repair attempts. Alignment does not flee at the first sign of difficulty. It withdraws when patterns prove unchangeable. Recognizing when effort turns into self-sacrifice is a sign of maturity, not weakness. Walking away restores internal order. It recenters your nervous system, your clarity, and your sense of agency. When you remain in misaligned spaces, you adapt to instability. You normalize anxiety, you lose touch with your baseline. Leaving interrupts that conditioning. It allows your body and mind to recalibrate to peace rather than tension. This restoration is not selfish, it is necessary. Alignment also honors the other person's reality. It does not attempt to force growth, presence, or accountability where none is available. By stepping away, you stop demanding what they cannot give and stop offering what is not received. This creates honesty. It removes the silent resentment that builds when expectations remain unmet. In this sense, walking away is one of the most respectful choices available. It respects your limits and theirs. There is courage in choosing alignment over attachment. Attachment clings to potential. Alignment responds to truth. Potential keeps you waiting. Alignment keeps you moving. When you walk away, you are not closing the door out of bitterness, but opening space for congruence. You choose to walk in the direction of environments that support growth rather than stagnation. Walking away is not the end of love. It is the end of confusion. It is the moment you decide that peace matters more than proving your capacity to endure. And in that decision, you realign with yourself. Walking away is often misunderstood as giving up, but in truth, it is one of the clearest demonstrati. Icons of self-awareness and emotional maturity. It is the moment you recognize that staying is costing you more than leaving ever could. When you choose to exit a dynamic that repeatedly drains, confuses, or diminishes you. You are not acting out of fear or weakness, you are responding to truth. You are honoring the reality of what is happening rather than clinging to the illusion of what might one day change. Many people equate endurance with strength. They believe that if they can just hold on longer, love harder, or be more patient, the situation will eventually transform. But endurance without reciprocity slowly erodes self-respect. It teaches you to tolerate what unsettles your spirit. Walking away interrupts that pattern. It is not an impulsive reaction. It is a conscious decision made after observing repeated misalignment. You leave not because you do not care, but because you finally care enough about yourself to stop absorbing harm. There is a deep difference between abandonment and exit. Abandonment is emotionally driven, often fueled by anger, resentment, or the desire to make the other person feel loss. Exit is grounded. It carries no need to punish or provoke. It simply acknowledges limits. You are not disappearing to make a point. You are stepping back to preserve your integrity. This distinction matters because it shifts the narrative from guilt to clarity. Walking away requires confronting uncomfortable truths. It means accepting that love alone does not heal incompatibility. That effort does not always lead to growth, and that connection without mutual presence is unsustainable. These realizations are painful, but they are also liberating. They free you from the exhausting task of trying to earn what should be freely given. In leaving, you stop negotiating your needs and start honoring them. Exit is also an act of alignment with your future self. Every time you stay in a space that keeps you small, you delay your own expansion. You teach yourself that. Comfort is negotiable, and peace is optional. Walking away corrects that message. It affirms that your emotional well-being matters, that your time is valuable, and that your life is meant to be lived with clarity rather than constant inner conflict. There is often fear attached to leaving, the fear of being alone, of regretting the decision, of being misunderstood. But staying out of fear is not safety, it is stagnation. Exit invites uncertainty, but it also invites possibility. It creates space for relationships and environments that can meet you without resistance. It allows you to breathe again, to hear your own thoughts without the noise of constant emotional tension. Walking away does not mean you failed. It means you listened. It means you paid attention to patterns instead of excuses, to behavior instead of promises. It means you chose alignment with truth over attachment to potential. This choice strengthens your discernment. It teaches you to trust yourself. To recognize when something no longer serves your growth, and to act accordingly. When you exit with clarity, you do not carry bitterness with you. You carry understanding. You leave knowing that you honored both yourself and reality. And that understanding becomes a foundation, one that supports healthier boundaries, deeper self-trust, and a future built on alignment rather than endurance. Failure is often defined by what ends, but growth is defined by what begins. When you choose to exit a situation that no longer aligns with your values, needs, or emotional well-being, it can feel like loss on the surface. Yet beneath that feeling lies obedience to truth, to self-respect, and to the quiet inner wisdom that knows when something has run its course. Exit. In this sense, is not collapse. It is completion. It is the recognition that staying would require self-betrayal, and leaving is the only way to remain faithful to who you are becoming. Many people remain in unfulfilling dynamics because they equate assurance with success. They fear that leaving means they did not try hard enough or that they somehow failed to make it work. But not every ending is a reflection of inadequacy. Some endings are evidence of discernment. They show that you can distinguish between temporary discomfort worth working through and chronic misalignment that erodes your spirit. Knowing when to stop is not quitting, it is wisdom in action. Exit requires courage because it asks you to trust your inner knowing over external validation. Others may not understand your decision. They may minimize your experience or frame your departure as impatience. But inner wisdom rarely shouts, it whispers. It speaks through unease, fatigue, and the persistent sense that you are outgrowing the space you are in. Obedience to that voice is an act of integrity. It means you are willing to honor truth even when it costs familiarity. There is also a spiritual dimension to exit. Every season has an assignment, and not every season is to be permanent. When a season ends, clinging to it delays the next phase of growth. Exit becomes a form of alignment with a larger design, one that moves you toward environments, relationships, and roles that match your evolution. Resisting exit often leads to stagnation. Embracing it opens the door to expansion. Failure drains energy, obedience restores it. When you stay where you are, no longer meant to be, life feels heavy. Decision-making becomes foggy. Motivation fades. When you exit in alignment with truth, there is relief, even amid grief. Your nervous system settles. Clarity returns. This is not accidental. It is the natural response to congruence when your inner and outer worlds realign. Exit also refines your discernment. Each time you choose alignment over comfort, you strengthen your ability to trust yourself. You learn that peace is a compass, not a reward. You begin to recognize early signs of misalignment and respond sooner, with less self-doubt. This growth is cumulative. It shapes how you enter future connections and how quickly you honor your boundaries. Obedience does not mean certainty about outcomes. It means faith in direction. You may not know exactly what comes next after you leave, but you know what you are leaving behind no longer fits. That knowing is sufficient. Growth rarely provides a detailed map. It provides a nudge. Exit is the moment you follow it. What looks like failure to the outside world often feels like freedom on the inside. Not because it is easy, but because it is true. And truth, once chosen, has a way of guiding you toward what is meant to meet you next. As you move forward from this message, remember this: your worth is not up for debate. Your peace is not something to bargain with. And your future does not require you to stay where clarity is absent. You are allowed to choose yourself without guilt. To walk away without explanation, and to trust the quiet wisdom guiding you toward alignment. Thank you for giving your time, your attention, and your openness to this truth. May it strengthen your resolve and steady your heart. Walk forward with confidence. Live anchored in self-respect, and know that choosing peace is always choosing power. Goodbye.